Ethan hadn't visited his mother's grave in years. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions. And for Ethan, it was work, relationships, and the endless grind of adulthood that kept him away. But today felt different. Special. Even. It had been 10 years since she passed, and something deep inside urged him to go. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was just time, but whatever it was, Ethan couldn't ignore it anymore. The drive to the cemetery was quiet, the kind of silence that makes you think about things you usually try to avoid. As he parked his car and stepped out, the air hit him. A crisp, cool breeze that carried the faint scent of earth and grass. The sky above was a soft gray, with clouds drifting lazily as if they didn't have anywhere important to be. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't sure why he felt so nervous. After all, it wasn't like she could judge him, right? Walking through the rows of headstones, Ethan noticed how each one told its own story. Some were old and weathered, their inscriptions faded by time. Others were newer, adorned with fresh flowers and personal mementos left behind by loved ones. Every step brought him closer to his destination, and with every step, memories flooded back. Memories of laughter, tears, and the countless little moments that made up a life shared with someone who meant everything. Finally, he reached her grave. There it was. Margaret Collins. Her name carved into the stone, simple yet elegant, just like she'd been. Ethan knelt down, brushing away dried leaves and dirt that had gathered at the base of the headstone. He placed the flowers he'd brought, a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, carefully beside it. For a moment, he just stared, letting the weight of the past settle over him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I should have come sooner." As he spoke, a gentle breeze swept past, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender. Ethan froze. Lavender. It was unmistakable. His mother always wore lavender perfume, a scent that lingered in their home long after she was gone. Could it really be her? Or was his mind playing tricks on him? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Grief could do strange things to a person, make them see or hear things that weren't there. Still, the coincidence was eerie. He closed his eyes, trying to focus. The sound of rustling leaves filled the air, along with the distant chirping of birds. It was peaceful here, almost too peaceful. And then, just as he began to stand, a voice broke the stillness. Not loud, not jarring, but unmistakably familiar. "Ethan." His heart skipped a beat. He turned around quickly, scanning the empty cemetery for any sign of life. No one. Just rows of graves stretching out endlessly, silent witnesses to his confusion. Was he imagining things? Had grief finally caught up with him? He stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then, against all logic, he responded. "Mom?" he called out hesitantly, half expecting silence in return. Instead, the same soft tone answered, "It's me, sweetheart." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as disbelief battled with longing. This couldn't be real. People didn't just talk to their deceased loved ones out of thin air. Yet the voice was so clear, so warm, that it felt impossible to deny. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, he asked, How is this possible?" Her reply came gently, almost apologetic. "I don't have much time, Ethan. I've waited so long to talk to you again." Ethereal though it was, the conversation grounded him. Questions swirled in his mind, but before he could ask anything else, she continued. "You've grown into such a good man, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Her words were like a balm to his soul, soothing years of self-doubt and regret, but pride wasn't enough to quell his curiosity. "Why now?" he asked. "Why wait until today?" There was a pause, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "Because today matters," she said finally. "And because you needed to hear this. You've carried so much guilt thinking you should have done more, been more. But none of this is your fault, Ethan." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Guilt, that heavy burden he'd carried for years, seemed lighter somehow. He wanted to believe her desperately, but there was still so much he didn't understand. Why was she here? What did she mean by today matters? Before he could press further, the wind picked up again, swirling around him like an invisible embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan smiled. Whether this was real or some trick of his mind, it didn't matter. In this moment, he felt closer to his mother than he had in years. Ethan's heart raced as he stood frozen in place, his mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. The voice, his mother's voice, was so clear, so real, that it felt like she was standing right beside him. But when he turned around, there was no one. Just the empty cemetery, the rows of headstones, and the gentle sway of trees in the breeze. He wanted to dismiss it as a figment of his imagination, but how could he? The scent of lavender still lingered in the air, faint yet unmistakable, just like her. "Mom?" he whispered again, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "Is that really you?" Her response came quickly, soft and reassuring. "Yes, Ethan, it's me." A wave of emotions crashed over him, relief, disbelief, joy, and even a touch of fear. How was this possible? Was he losing his mind? Or was this some kind of miracle? He knelt back down by her grave, clutching the bouquet of lilies tightly in his hands as if holding on to something tangible would keep him grounded. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can you be here? You're gone." There was a pause before she replied, her tone tinged with sadness. "I know this is hard for you to believe, sweetheart, but I'm not truly gone. Not completely. I've always been with you, in your memories, in the lessons I taught you, in the love we shared, and sometimes, when the time is right, I can reach out to you." Ethan shook his head, trying to process her words. None of it made logical sense, but he couldn't deny the warmth spreading through his chest. If this was a dream or some trick of his mind, he didn't want it to end. Not yet. "You've grown so much since I last saw you," she continued, her voice filled with pride. "I've watched you, Ethan. Even though you couldn't see me, I've been here, cheering you on through every challenge, every victory." Her words brought tears to his eyes. For years he'd carried the weight of guilt, wondering if he'd done enough for her while she was alive, wondering if she'd been proud of him. Hearing her say those words now, hearing the love in her voice, felt like lifting a burden he hadn't realized was crushing him. "But why now?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "Why wait until today to talk? To me?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because today is important, Ethan. It's not just about remembering me. It's about moving forward, about letting go of the pain and guilt you've been carrying. You've spent too long blaming yourself for things that weren't your fault." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Guilt, that heavy, suffocating feeling, had followed him for years. He'd convinced himself that if only he'd visited more often, paid closer attention, or been there during her final days maybe, things would have turned out differently. But now, hearing her tell him that none of it was his fault, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally forgive himself. "I miss you so much, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Every day feels incomplete without you." "And I miss you too, sweetheart," she replied, her tone gentle and loving. "But life goes on, and you have so much ahead of you. Don't let my absence hold you back. Live fully, love deeply, and trust that I'll always be with you, in spirit if not in person, if not in—" Her words were comforting, but they also left him with more questions. Why had she chosen this moment to speak to him? What did she mean by, "today is important"? Before he could ask, she continued, "There are things I need to tell you, Ethan. Things I couldn't say before, but you must listen carefully because I don't have much time." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Time? What did she mean by that? Was this conversation fleeting? Would she disappear as suddenly as she appeared? Fear gripped him at the thought of losing her all over again. "Please don't go," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "Not yet. I need you." "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said softly. "But this isn't forever, just remember. I'm always with you, in ways you might not expect. Now listen closely. As she began to speak, Ethan leaned in, hanging on to every word. Her voice was calm and steady, guiding him through a flood of emotions. Each sentence felt like a lifeline, pulling him out of the darkness he'd been drowning in for years. He wanted to interrupt, to ask questions, but something told him to stay silent and let her guide the conversation. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The world around them seemed to fade into the background, leaving only Ethan and the voice of the woman who had shaped his life. For the first time in a decade, he felt truly connected to her, not as a distant memory but as a living presence in his heart. And though he knew their time together was limited, he vowed to cherish every second of it. Whatever she had to say, whatever truths she needed to share, he was ready to hear them, because deep down he knew this moment was a gift, one he wouldn't take for granted. Ethan listened intently as his mother's voice continued, each word carrying a weight that made him feel both comforted and uneasy. She spoke with a tenderness he remembered from his childhood, but there was also an urgency in her tone, a sense that she had important things to say before their time together ran out. "There are things I never told you, Ethan," she began, her voice soft yet firm. "Things I kept hidden because I didn't want to burden you. But now, it's time for you to know the truth." Ethan's heart raced. Truth? What truth could she possibly be referring to? His mind scrambled to piece together fragments of his past, searching for anything that might explain why she sounded so serious now. He stayed silent, letting her guide the conversation, afraid that interrupting might break the fragile connection between them. "When your father left us," she continued, her voice tinged with sadness, "I wanted to shield you from the pain. You were so young, barely old enough to understand what was happening. I thought keeping everything together, holding down 2 jobs, making sure we had food on the table, doing everything I could to give you a normal life, was the best way to protect you." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Growing up, Ethan had always admired his mother's strength. She worked tirelessly, often coming home late at night after long shifts at the diner or sewing factory. He'd assumed her exhaustion was simply a result of hard work, but now he wondered if there was more to the story. Was she hiding struggles he hadn't noticed? "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "But it wasn't easy, Ethan. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was doing enough for you, wondering if I was failing you in some way." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. The image of his mother crying alone while he slept upstairs broke his heart. All those years he'd taken her sacrifices for granted, assuming they came naturally to her. Now, hearing the truth behind her actions, he realized just how much she had given up for him. "But there's something else," she added, her tone shifting to one of hesitation. "Something I've carried with me all these years. Something I couldn't bring myself to tell you before I passed." Ethan's stomach tightened. Whatever it was, it clearly weighed heavily on her. He braced himself, unsure if he was ready to hear what she had to say next. "Do you remember the accident?" she asked gently. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Of course he remembered the accident, the car crash that had taken her life. It was the day his world shattered into pieces. For years he'd replayed the events in his mind, trying to make sense of what happened. The police report had said it was just bad luck, icy roads, poor visibility, and a tragic twist of fate. But now hearing her ask about it made him wonder if there was more to the story. "Yes," he replied, his voice barely audible. "I remember." "It wasn't an accident, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "At least not entirely." His breath caught in his chest. Not an accident? What did she mean by that? A million questions flooded his mind, but he forced himself to stay quiet, knowing she needed to finish what she was saying. "Someone tampered with my car," she explained, her words slow and deliberate. "I didn't realize it until it was too late. By the time I figured out something was wrong, I was already losing control." Ethan's hands clenched into fists as anger surged through him. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her car? Who would do such a thing? And why? The idea that her death wasn't random, that someone had caused it, felt like reopening a wound he thought had healed. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "Why would anyone hurt you?" She sighed, her voice filled with sorrow. "I don't know for certain who was responsible, but I think it had something to do with your father. After he left, rumors followed him. Money troubles, shady deals, people who weren't happy with him. I think someone wanted to send him a message and I got caught in the middle." The revelation left Ethan reeling. His father, a man he barely remembered, had been absent from his life for as long as he could recall. They'd parted ways when Ethan was just a child, leaving only vague memories of arguments and slammed doors. Over the years, Ethan had convinced himself that his father's absence was better than his presence. But now, hearing that his father's actions, or perhaps his enemies, might have played a role in his mother's death, he felt a mix of anger and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, his voice rising. "If you knew someone had done this to you, why didn't you say something?" "I wanted to protect you," she replied, her voice breaking. "You were so young, Ethan. I didn't want you to carry the weight of this knowledge. I thought it would destroy you, and honestly, I didn't have proof, just suspicions. I didn't want to drag you into something dangerous without being sure." Her explanation made sense, but it didn't ease the storm brewing inside him. Anger, grief, and betrayal swirled together, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. For years, he'd believed her death was a tragic accident. Now, knowing it might have been intentional and possibly tied to his estranged father, felt like a betrayal of its own. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted you to have a good life, free from the pain I carried. But now I need you to let go of the guilt you've been holding on to. None of this was your fault. Do you hear me?" Her words pierced through his anger, reminding him of the love that had always been at the center of their relationship. Despite everything, she was still looking out for him, still trying to protect him, even now. "I miss you, Mom," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I wish you were here." "And I wish I could be," she replied softly. "But I'm always with you, Ethan. In your heart, in your memories, in the lessons I taught you. Don't let fear or anger hold you back anymore. Live fully, love deeply, and trust that I'll always be watching over you." As her voice faded, the cemetery grew quieter, the world around him seeming to pause. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the gravestone and letting the weight of her words sink in. Though he still had so many questions, one thing was clear: his mother's love was eternal, reaching beyond even death itself. Ethan sat there, his mind reeling as the enormity of his mother's revelation sank in. Someone had tampered with her car. That much was clear now. But who? And why? The questions swirled like a storm inside him, each one more unsettling than the last. He felt anger bubbling up, not just at whoever had done this, but also at himself for never suspecting anything. All these years he'd believed her death was an accident, a cruel twist of fate that couldn't be avoided. But now, knowing it might have been deliberate, everything changed. "Mom," he said finally, his voice trembling with emotion. "Why didn't you tell the police? If you suspected something, they could have investigated. They could have found out who did this." Her response came softly, tinged with regret. "I thought about it, Ethan. Believe me, I did. But what would I have told them? That I suspected someone tampered with my car? Without proof, it would have sounded like paranoia. And even if they had looked into it, I wasn't sure how far they'd get. Whoever did this, they were careful. Too careful." Her words made sense, but they didn't ease the frustration building inside him. How could she have kept something so important to herself? How could she have carried that burden alone? The thought of her sitting in silence, knowing someone might have wanted to harm her, broke his heart all over again. "But why didn't you at least tell me?" he pressed, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "If you knew something was wrong, I deserved to know. I could have helped you. We could have figured it out together." There was a pause before she answered, and when she spoke, her tone was heavy with sadness. Because I didn't want you to live in fear, Ethan. You were already growing up without your father, dealing with so much uncertainty. I couldn't bear the thought of adding to that by telling you someone might be after us. I wanted to protect you, to give you a chance at a normal life, even if it meant keeping this secret from you. Her explanation tugged at his heartstrings, but it didn't fully quiet the storm raging within him. Protecting him, that was always her priority. She'd spent her entire life putting his needs above her own, sacrificing everything to ensure he had a stable home, food on the table, and love in abundance. But now, knowing she'd sacrificed even her peace of mind for him, it felt almost unbearable. I understand why you did it, he said slowly, trying to steady his voice. But Mom, you shouldn't have had to carry that by yourself. You shouldn't have had to face something like that alone. I know, she admitted, her voice soft and filled with sorrow. And maybe that's part of the reason I'm here now, to set things right. To give you the answers I couldn't give you before, because you deserve to know the truth, Ethan, even if it's painful. Her words resonated deeply with him, cutting through the chaos in his mind. As much as he wanted to cling to his anger, he couldn't deny the sincerity in her voice. This wasn't about blame or guilt, it was about closure. She was giving him the opportunity to confront the past, to seek justice where none had been sought before. So what do I do now? He asked, his voice quieter but laced with determination. How do I find out who did this? That's up to you, she replied gently. But I can tell you this. Start with your father. Whatever happened, it's tied to him. People he owed money to, people he crossed paths with during those shady deals. I think they're the key to understanding what happened to me. The mention of his father sent another wave of conflicting emotions crashing over him. His father, a man he barely remembered, a ghost from his childhood, had left such a profound impact on their lives even in his absence. For years, Ethan had tried to block him out, focusing instead on the memories of his mother and the life they'd built together. But now it seemed impossible to ignore the connection between his father's actions and his mother's death. I don't even know where to begin, he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. He disappeared years ago. No one's heard from him since. Start small, she encouraged. Look into his past. Talk to people who knew him. There are pieces of the puzzle out there. You just have to find them. And remember, Ethan, this isn't about revenge. It's about finding the truth, about giving yourself the peace you deserve. Her words struck a chord deep within him. Peace. That was something he'd been searching for ever since she passed away. For years, he'd carried the weight of her absence, the unanswered questions, the lingering guilt. Now, armed with the knowledge she'd given him, he realized that uncovering the truth might finally bring him the closure he needed. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, grief, determination. They all coexisted in a delicate balance, pushing him forward even as they weighed him down. He glanced at the gravestone once more, tracing the engraved letters of her name with his eyes. I'll do it, Mom, he promised, his voice firm despite the tears streaming down his face. I'll find out what happened, for you. I know you will, she replied, her tone warm and proud. And no matter what you discover, remember this. I love you, Ethan. Always have, always will. Don't let fear or bitterness hold you back. Live your life fully and trust that I'll always be with you, in spirit if not in person. Her voice began to fade, growing softer with each passing second. Ethan reached out instinctively as if trying to hold on to her presence, but the air around him felt empty once more. The scent of lavender lingered briefly before vanishing completely, leaving only the cool evening breeze and the sound of rustling leaves. For a long time he sat there, staring at the gravestone and letting her words echo in his mind. Though she was gone, for now, he felt closer to her than ever before. The pain of her loss still lingered, but it was accompanied by a newfound sense of purpose. He didn't know where this journey would take him or what truths he might uncover. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't stop until he found the answers she had entrusted to him. As he stood up and brushed the dirt off his knees, Ethan took a deep breath. The road ahead would be difficult, possibly even dangerous, but he was ready to face it. For his mother, for himself, and for the truth that had been hidden for far too long. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The cemetery, once vibrant with light, was now cloaked in shadows. Ethan stood up slowly, his legs stiff from sitting on the cold ground for so long. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, grief, determination, but amidst it all there was clarity. For the first time in years he felt like he had a purpose, a mission. He glanced one last time at his mother's gravestone, the letters, etched into the stone glowing faintly in the fading light, Margaret Collins. Her name seemed to pulse with life, as if reminding him that she wasn't truly gone. She was still here, in his heart, in his memories, and now, in the truth she'd entrusted to him. He placed a hand on the cool surface of the headstone, letting the connection anchor him. "I won't let you down, Mom," he whispered, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I'll find out what happened, I promise." With that vow echoing in his mind, Ethan turned and walked back toward his car. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because he was burdened by sadness, but because he carried the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about honoring her memory, giving her justice, and reclaiming the peace they both deserved. As he drove away from the cemetery, Ethan replayed their conversation in his mind. Every word, every pause, every emotion, it all felt so vivid, so real. How could something like this happen? Was it some kind of miracle? Or was it simply his subconscious piecing together fragments of guilt and longing? He didn't have the answers, nor did he need them right now. What mattered was that he'd heard her voice, felt her presence, and received the guidance she'd been waiting years to give him. His thoughts drifted to his father, a man who had become little more than a ghost in Ethan's life. The few memories he had were fragmented, flashes of arguments, slamming doors, and the hollow silence that followed. His departure. After his father left, Ethan had convinced himself that forgetting was better than remembering. But now, knowing that his father's actions, or perhaps his enemies, might have played a role in his mother's death, ignoring the past no longer seemed like an option. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a sense of resolve he hadn't felt in years. He sat at his kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, and opened his laptop. Where do you even begin searching for someone who vanished decades ago? He started small, typing his father's name into search engines and scrolling through old news articles. At first, nothing came up, just dead ends and outdated information. But then, buried deep within a local newspaper archive, he found something. A mention of his father's name tied to a failed business deal over 20 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ethan dug deeper, following every lead, no matter how insignificant it seemed. He reached out to old family friends, distant relatives, and acquaintances who might have known his father. Some refused to talk, others claimed they didn't know anything, but a few offered bits and pieces of information that helped him piece together the puzzle. One name kept coming up, Victor Kane. From what Ethan gathered, Victor was a loan shark, a ruthless man known for collecting debts by any means necessary. Apparently, his father had borrowed money from Victor to fund one of his ill-fated ventures, and when the business collapsed, he disappeared without repaying the debt. Whether Victor was directly involved in his mother's accident or had sent someone else to deliver the message, Ethan couldn't be sure, but it was enough to point him in the right direction. Weeks turned into months as Ethan delved deeper into his investigation. It wasn't easy. There were moments when frustration threatened to overwhelm him, times when he questioned whether he was chasing ghosts instead of answers. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered his mother's voice. Her words echoed in his mind, urging him to keep going, to trust that the truth was worth fighting for. Finally, after countless late nights and endless phone calls, Ethan found what he was looking for. An old associate of Victor Kane's, a man named Gary, agreed to meet with him under the condition of anonymity. They met in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Gary was nervous, glancing around constantly as if expecting trouble to walk through the door at any moment. "You're playing with fire, kid," Gary warned, his voice low and gravelly. "Victor doesn't take kindly to people digging into his business." "I'm not afraid of him," Ethan replied firmly, though his stomach churned with anxiety. "I just want to know what happened to my mom." Gary hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to Victor and his own conscience. Finally, he sighed and leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "Your dad owed Victor a lot of money. When he skipped town, Victor got mad, real mad. He sent a couple of guys to send a message to your mom, figuring she'd know where your dad was hiding. They tampered with her car, thinking she'd survive the crash and get scared enough to spill the beans, but things didn't go according to plan." Ethan's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, his nails digging into his palms. Hearing the confirmation of his worst fears made his blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help him now. "Do you know who those men were?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Gary shook his head. "No names, just faces. And trust me, you don't want to go looking for them. These guys are dangerous." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. He didn't need names, not yet. What he needed was proof. Something tangible that could bring Victor and his accomplices to justice. Gary promised to send him copies of old records and documents related to his father's debt, hoping it would be enough to satisfy Ethan without putting either of them in danger. Armed with new evidence, Ethan took his findings to the authorities. It wasn't easy convincing them to reopen a case that had been closed for over a decade, but the documents Gary provided were enough to warrant a fresh investigation. Detectives began digging into Victor Kane's operation, uncovering a web of corruption and violence that stretched far beyond Ethan's family. Months later, Ethan received a call from the detective leading the case. Victor Kane and several of his associates had been arrested on charges ranging from extortion to manslaughter. While the statute of limitations prevented them from prosecuting the murder itself, the arrests brought a measure of closure Ethan hadn't thought possible. Standing once again at his mother's grave, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also been healing. He knelt down, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone, and smiled softly. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with quiet triumph. "I found the truth. You can rest now." As he stood up, he swore he caught a whiff of lavender on the breeze. Turning around, he scanned the empty cemetery, half expecting to see her standing there. But the space remained vacant, save for the rustling leaves and chirping birds. And yet, he didn't feel alone. Somewhere, somehow, he knew she was still with him, guiding him, watching over him, loving him. With that knowledge in his heart, Ethan walked away, ready to embrace the future and the legacy of love and strength she had left behind.